Chris Dodds, MPA, will come after you for child pornography. We have a civil duty to maintain free speech, so that, you know, the terms of service are not like, it's more like your parking fine. You know, it's not, you know, how many of you in a if you're in a private parking lot, worry if it says do not enter, you go the wrong way on an arrow? You don't worry. It's more like that than, you know, going down, you know, on I-91 against traffic. But the real thing is these terms of service, if you read them, are comedy acts. Verizon said you cannot use their connection to disparage Verizon. You know, now the cities have signed agreements, and there are a couple of positions saying you can only use the iNet connections for good thoughts and things. So we really have to establish a mindset that, and this is why I vote for understanding. I mean, I talk about acting locally, but number one is understanding. Once you understand bits have no intrinsic meaning, they're not red bits, pink bits, red bits, they're just bits. It's very hard to even understand terms of service make sense. The real terms of service problems are the underwater reefs, the agree screens, and things like that, that mean your pacemaker can't communicate because it hasn't proven it's worthy of communicating where you are. So I think you have to actively, not just fight about terms of service on the residential agreements, but start to go to the public space, like tell JetBlue that I take you more, but your internet connection, you know, is broken. And one last thing is, back when I was at MIT, Mort Perlan ran telecommunications, and Peter was, you know, goes back to those days. And he assured me that I could have my home modem for my job, my work. I used it for work as well as a student. They couldn't tell me I had to get a business account. I could use a residential account. Now, the laws for common carrier didn't have these terms of service, but it helped to have a telecommunications lawyer at MIT to basically stand the ground when AT&T tried and broke terms on what to do with switches. They pushed back. We've lost the idea of civil rights, so at the very least, get the ACLU and EFF and support them.
I have a question, a two-part question. I live in DuPont. I'm ready to give up Comcast. How do we get a community network there? The second part of that question is, my neighbors in my building would be worried about their individual security, about sharing a network because other people could see their machines. What's my answer to them?
Okay, let me answer the second one. This is the problem where I have to compromise my principles. Part of what I did Microsoft is put all those NAS in the house. So I'm the bishop of Andre Maginot. Anybody know who Andre Maginot is? He put a wall around France. Now the mistake he made was he knew you needed an army, that the wall is a temporary barrier, and you shouldn't just give up, but he died. So France didn't do the army. So we have bubble baby security in the house, and people scared if they're not. It turns out they take the laptops, they plug into public networks, they generally work, but Windows, Microsoft, Mac, all these default to the wrong security settings. So for now, you got to tell your neighbors, you got to have a bubble baby. You can put a router in each apartment to sort of, you know, to act as a firewall while pushing back. So you can do that. Just saying, it's the same as getting from Comcast. You're putting a barrier between. You can do that. Of course, by the way, Ruff and I both in Newton, we got some of the first cable modems, and you could indeed see your neighbors. The other question is, can you get past Comcast? The answer is, wait. You have to choose your battles, and I think unless you're ready to really work hard, you're rich in neighborhood. Don't complain. Start the momentum someplace else. That's why, though Bruff and I are Newton, we don't bother setting up antennas among ourselves because, you know, we're rich. We can afford Comcast. It's an area, so you can't fight the battle there. You got to choose where you fight.
And then I'll happily answer question one. Partly because I'm not an expert on security. But so if you want to get a network in DuPont, anytime you want to get a community network, step one is be or find an organizer. And in Mount Pleasant, how I got started was I said, okay, I want to start a community wireless network, and I will be the organizer. This is how I want to get to know my neighborhood, and how I also want to learn more about mesh networking the hard way. So what I then did as a newcomer to the neighborhood, I didn't have any context with reality. I got connected to Anya Schoolman, who is a Mount Pleasant resident who started the Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op and led the solar co-op movement in all of DC. Thanks to Anya's organizing efforts, not only in Mount Pleasant, but also her efforts that found many other organizers in other neighborhoods in DC, there are now like many hundreds of homes in DC that have solar panels on them that then share excess electricity not only with themselves but like across the homes. And they've even gotten some legislation passed in DC that makes it easier for people to get tax credits and stuff like that. So through this organizing effort, Anya had quite a few contacts and quite a few contacts in Mount Pleasant. So I asked her, you know, here's what I'm trying to do. What should I do? What is the path I should take? Can you give me any advice? And she was very kind to both allow me to send a couple of emails over her existing, you know, email lists for the Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op, and also to host a house gathering at her place this past July, where about 10 interested people came, which was a fine number by me because 6 of them pledged to be community anchors, all but one of whom, Anya herself, are now up. And my plan is within the next 48 hours to get Anya, her router up with the help of her son Walter. So you got to either be or find an organizer, someone who will spend time and is a believer in what this is about, and then you got to find the real social networks and the real social capacity that already exists. I really like what Bruff said about taking a $12 billion business and turning it into a $2 billion business, because you know the point of that is that it's not like you're destroying value, you're just reapportioning value to where it should be going, and that's precisely what I'm trying to do, like with Mount Pleasant. And what you could do in DuPont, if you find that the demand is there for one reason or another, to I don't know if it's simply to share internet access or if it's to, like, you know, one thing I would like to do in Mount Pleasant is put some environmental monitors up on routers across the neighborhood and see what is our actual air quality, like, you know, hour to hour in different parts of Mount Pleasant. Or whether it is like with the folks we're working with in Detroit at the Kimmany Rec Center, in the most polluted zip code in the entire state of Michigan. That's one of the things they're doing. But also, they're so cut off from the rest of Detroit that it takes 45 minutes by bus for any of their kids to get to a library. And if there's ever any kind of disaster, or if the Marathon oil plant, which they live right next to, decides to release 30,000 tons of sulfate into the air and not tell anyone until 2 months later, you know, they need a way to communicate with each other, that because, you know, it's really hard for them to get internet access. It's really hard for any city services to reach them, much less the fact that it is Detroit after all. So you find the need and you meet the need with the infrastructure and the organizing. And my guess is that you will find that the value in organizing that would ultimately both reduce costs, but should also improve connections in some way. But the other thing to do is I'm happy to chat about making this happen in DuPont if you'd like.
Could I stick in a comment or two?
Please.
Please.
I don't have at my fingertips a fiber map of what buildings are on net in DuPont, but it would be worth looking at Cogent and a couple other fiber providers. In fact, if you want to email me, I can suggest where you would look. You might well find that there are buildings where you could get an enormous amount of symmetric capacity in a building that's close to your neighborhood, especially if you're anywhere, you know, in an urban area as opposed to in suburbs. So you might not have to go and share bits and pieces of your Comcast infrastructure or whatever it is you have. You might be able to get a real heavy-duty symmetric pipe for significantly less cost than you imagine. And you can clearly get 100 megabit committed data rate full duplex wireless links for, say, $160 each to get from that office building where you know. So just if it's DuPont is in DuPont Circle, you've got a lot of other places to get your bandwidth besides from the duopoly. The other comment is about security. Yes, it's a sort of IT-centric thing right now, but that just means somebody needs to automate it and productize it. The actual cost of providing very secure systems is mostly software. The cost of running hairy encryption algorithms is increasingly for free in the silicon. I think I mentioned that NetBlazer, each of our business customers gets their own encrypted VPN tunnel so that no one else can see their traffic between their site and the internet backbone. That doesn't really cost us anything extra because there's 45 megabits of encryption capability in the router that we're using anyway at the customer site, and there's hardware accelerated encryption logic in the devices we use at the urban head end. So basically the cost, the incremental cost of heavy security is not a recurring cost, it's a one-time software development. Now, if somebody has to do something that's appropriate for your community network, NetBlazer's doing something appropriate for the business we're doing, but the incremental cost is a one-time software development. It's not a recurring cost per customer, per site, whatever. It's, you know, a software cost is pretty cheap.
Just one other thing to mention. You said Comcast. That's ambiguous. Because remember, Comcast is also providing you with cable content. And we're in a transition where cable content is starting over IP, but is still tied to owning the wire as a proof. Even if you watch it someplace else, you've got to have the wire. Just like in South Seas, you have to have a big stone to show you own something, or to play music, you need a piece of plastic. So this cable franchise thing is one sticky point for slowing down the transition, and over the next few years, that's going to change, but you need to be aware of it now.
Yeah, I'm willing to use Hulu and Amazon Prime free movies for now until that happens.
Thanks, and hi, Bruff. It's Eric. Glad you were able to join us. So this is a question that I actually give to Bruff last because I think Bruff has an answer, but it's also kind of why I would actually agree that probably just the generic idea of community networks, and if only everybody in the entire world used community networks, then we wouldn't need carriers. You know, if we look at the sidewalk model, you know, I am a builder. I build a private sidewalk, or I'm a city. I build a sidewalk. It's a one-time sunk cost, and it lasts for 20 or 30 years. And I don't need to do anything with it. Whereas my big concern here is not the access network, because I think just as, you know, the phone companies were shocked to find out that people would actually buy their own telephones, and were really shocked to find out that those telephones started incorporating answering machines and started incorporating speed dial, things that they just never ever, because customers would not pay extra for a handset. They just want the cheap stand. Well, you know, customers are willing to buy equipment, customers are willing to power the equipment, customers are willing to pay somebody or do their own wiring themselves or put up their Wi-Fi. But as Bruff said, people, if you went to someone and said, would you like some IP access? They'd say, well, no, I've got a bathroom. If you said, would you like some internet access? They'd go, oh yeah, that's something I really want.
No, it's for internet.
Internet access.
No, or
Right, yes.
I want to make it.
Yeah, internet access. And so the question is, you know, and today at least, an internet backbone means somebody's dug lots of trenches with big pipes and that have peering agreements to other networks, because we're talking about a network of networks, so you're connecting to these other networks, whether they're domestic in the US or they're in Japan or Korea, which is going to be a bit far for unlicensed or any color radio to get to. Who's going to pay for that? Because it's not like an interstate highway that we pay some taxes and gets built, and we don't need to really pay very much for 20 or 30 years. You got to pay for the electricity to keep the lights on. You got to pay people to go out and, you know, make sure it keeps working, all that. And I'm glad, or this is a softball for Bob. So I'll let Dave get his exercise in and run the mic back. Dave.
So, can I make a comment?
Yeah, while the mic's moving, yeah. Go for it.
What happened to? I've lost audio.
No, you're good.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we're back again. Okay. Hi, Eric. So indeed, the problem I don't have an instant solution for is the middle mile problem. I can see, but the optimistic thing is, if you can build an access network that aggregates enough people to represent a reasonable demand, and supposing I had an access network that aggregated 5,000 of my neighbors, chances are that that would be enough to justify someone in addition to Verizon and Comcast, but somebody else like Cogent, Level 3, AboveNet, Veroxity, you name it, to pay to bring a fiber to the neighborhood. If you could just aggregate enough local access to get competitive access to the backbone, your total cost for bandwidth drops by about an order of magnitude. That's about what the duopoly is costing us. Maybe it's a factor of 30, but it's, you know, it's a lot. So, you know, some of you may have seen, you know, famous paper Homes with Tails that advocated that community or a condominium fiber project to connect a bunch of homes. The point about that is if you had 5,000 homes that each owned their own fiber to an aggregation point, that aggregation point would be interesting enough that Cogent would build there, Level 3 would build there, and they'd pay the admittedly high cost of digging trenches or buying conduit or renting poles to get there because you had 5,000 people. So we do have to have a problem of how do we solve the middle mile. We have given a monopoly basically to the phone company and a second one to the cable company for those rights of way. And the piece that hurts the worst that I don't have a solution for is the middle mile. We can do access with wireless. If the political people want to argue policy, I wouldn't worry about the access as much as I would worry about the middle mile. Okay.
We're in a world in transition. So you talk about networks of networks, and I'm saying we don't have no networks. That networks are basically, networking, and this is from Andy, networking is something we do, not a service we have to buy. I compare it with social networks. Anybody know what a Yenta is? Okay, but you can have the old model assembly ranges, social networks for you, or you can do it yourself. So we have this with the sidewalk or the highway model. At some point you reach the ocean, and you might have to pay somebody to take a ship. You can buy your own ship. You have a choice. So we have a transitional model, sort of. We're in the days when, how many of you know about the history of the Interstate Defense Highway System? Here's a question. What's the name of the lieutenant who drove across the country and found he couldn't really drive across the country? Yes. So we're at the stage where we have a mixed model. You sometimes have to hop on the train, and okay, you do it, you community purchase. So I don't see there's a big problem there. This is the thing about the sidewalk model. You have to get your neighbors to understand why they should invest in a sidewalk, or you have your own cesspool.